Hi everyone and welcome to today's astrological update. Now right now we have a pretty tensioned sky because on one hand Mercury is starting to form the oppositions where it stands across the sky, first of all from Jupiter retrograde in the sign of Capricorn, and then Pluto, and then naturally by the very end of the week Saturn. And the combination of this energy, because we have to look at the big picture, because Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn are relatively close to each other, where Jupiter and Pluto are still conjunct. So this is like a amalgam of energies. This is where the symbolism of all three planets, as in Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto, of course all of them retrograde in the sign of Capricorn, interconnects with each other. And of course, their manifestation, their symbolism, their effect, their influence on us goes hand in hand. And Mercury, the planet of the mind, right now standing relatively alone in the sign of Cancer, where it also represents our emotional intelligence and how we process emotions. So this can be a very strong and very heavy reality check. This is where our inner truth comes face to face with the external expression of that truth. So this is where we might need to make compromises, where we might need to readapt our decisions. This is where we might have to get down to earth and look very, very objectively what is possible in our lives and what is not really possible, either because of time, Saturn, our circumstances, our present moment circumstances, as in what it is that we have done in the past and how we have built up our lives leading up to the present moment, because that is what actually tells us what is possible and what is not really possible. And there is also that Pluto. There are a lot of things that we have to surrender, especially if those are goals, desires which simply do not align with our present moment circumstances. So this is an energy which all of us have to process, at least in one area of our lives. And Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in the sign of Capricorn also represent the world stage. So that is also a factor that influences us and we cannot disregard. We have to take it into the big picture, but of course this doesn't represent that we have to be immersed in it, that we cannot be detached from it. But detachment doesn't necessarily mean that we do not have to accept that regardless of what attitude or psychological position we adapt, it is still going to influence us physically, materially, socially, politically, economically. So the only way and chance that we wouldn't be affected by it whatsoever is if we would live the life of a hermit, absolutely and totally isolated from the outside world, from society, etc. And that is definitely not the case for the vast majority of us. Of course, Mercury being in the very emotional sign of Cancer, where it's not just our present emotions, but it is also our past, our emotional maturity, how we got there, all of our emotional experiences, good and bad, put into one place. So emotionally speaking, it is the big picture, and Mercury in this sign has a lot to take in because it is an opposition. So the symbolism of Mercury and the Capricorn planets have to balance themselves out, and that is exactly why it is a wake-up call. So on one hand, if we look strictly from a physical reality perspective, well, we might become aware that our present moment circumstances and our options for the future, for everything that we want to accomplish, everything that we want to do, maybe work career wise or simply the material aspects of our lives, well, it isn't very optimistic. It isn't extremely hopeful in the present moment because there are so very many limitations that simply do not depend on us. But at the same time, even though this can, bring forth a certain kind of melancholy, a certain kind of feeling defeated, and Pluto retrograde is all about surrender, yet there is still hope in the sky, and this energy of hope is very, very strong. In this present moment, it is building up power, it is building up amplitude. So chances are, by the time these oppositions become even more influential, the energy of hope and faith and optimism can simply stand its ground and offer us a totally different perspective, the other end of the spectrum, where Mercury also receives a harmonious, supremely harmonious celestial conversation, a trine, a blessing from Neptune in its home sign of Pisces, which is the power of the spirit. It is the power of unconditional love, solidarity, empathy, hope, faith, everything spiritual and metaphysical in nature, so to speak. So Neptune is basically telling us it doesn't matter how physical reality looks like, there is hope, there is still a chance that maybe your inner power, your inner strength can simply overturn the situation, especially that Neptune itself forms sextiles, harmonious celestial conversations with Jupiter and Pluto, and that simply means dreams, hopes, and faith manifested in physical reality. So basically staying hopeful and tapping into your faith, not giving up, believing that there is miracle, that there is divine benevolence, that the universe is a very benevolent power which conspires in our favor. And after we learn the lesson, after we embody the spirit, well, there is no reason why it shouldn't turn our situations around, regardless how dire it is. So basically, this reality check is also completed by the energy of hope and our own individual and personal alchemical powers and abilities to transmute everything into what we desire, into what we seek to experience, coming from a place of purity, of course. So if we look at the sky from an alchemical perspective, well, this tension between Mercury and the Capricorn planets makes a lot of sense because, it has to be revealed to us. It has to make that much sense to us what it is we are transmuting, because we absolutely know where we want to get, the place we want to reach from an alchemical perspective, as in what we want to experience, what we want to manifest. But at the same time, we cannot do that if we don't know what we are transmuting, what the prime material is, so to speak. Or from a different perspective, well, look at it this way. First of all, you have to own everything in your life, good and bad. You have to totally own and be the sole possessor of your situation. Because only by owning it, only by being the ruler and one who can exert power over your situation, only that way can you transmute it. Because you cannot transmute, change, alter anything that you do not own. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say that someone gifts you a piece of jewelry, maybe a ring, which is really, really beautiful, but it's simply way too big for you. It is not your size, but if you ignore that it doesn't fit, that it's not perfect for you, the style might be really appropriate for your personality, your preferences, so you absolutely like it, but you cannot use it. So here you have two possible choices. Well, one choice is to return it and say, well, I'm really sorry, but this doesn't fit me, so I have to give it back. Or the other choice is you accept it, you say your thanks and gratitude, and then take it to the jeweler, and the jeweler will very quickly measure your finger and, transform it, alchemize it into something which is perfectly suitable for you. And by this, you have your cake and you also eat it. But it did require, on one hand, wisdom to accept it, and on the other hand, an extra investment of power, time, and energy to take it to the jeweler and pay the jeweler and etc. So that is exactly why it's so very important whenever we are in a very complicated, delicate, or maybe unfavorable situation, to own it, to accept it, to look at it with realism, and to even take in all of the ways that it can limit us, because by this truth being crystal clear in our minds, that is already a massive advantage, because we can think of ways or maybe invite inspiration into our lives on how to transform this situation. But you cannot transform anything unless it's crystal clear to you, unless you know what you're transforming, and of course unless you know in which way it can be transformed and which way this transformation can advantage you massively. Because the symbolism of the gold ring, the universe gives you something highly valuable, so it's not really susceptible of declining, as in you would be very unwise to try and just get out of the situation, reject it, not own it, give it back to the universe, because on one hand that can of course be interpreted as a very ungrateful and unwise gesture, because it is gold, but you might foolishly or out of pride or whatever not see it as gold. As in, for example, when you're in a situation where maybe you don't have any options in your life, where you're totally stuck, when you just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and here we're not talking about from a psychological perspective, because it doesn't really matter if you're melancholic or not. It is the actual situation at, when physical reality just doesn't give you any options, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. As in, even speculating a way out or how to progress or etc. would be self-defeating, because there is none. Well, that usually represents that the universe is actually inspiring you. It is actually forcing you to turn this tension of being stuck, of having so many desires and goals, etc., and not being able to live them, take action, be there and work in the world. By this, the universe knows that you have some kind of hidden potential or something that you haven't explored deep within yourself. So that's why it's giving you this gift of being stuck, so that one way or another you get outside of the box and try to look at things which you have never ever considered before. Because maybe the gold ring is exactly that, the potential which you cannot see. Because even if returning to the symbolism of the gold ring, well, the gold ring is not even your style, but if you just accept it, well, you can sell it on and it's still a resource for yourself, because a gold ring wouldn't sell for just any amount of money. It would still advantage you. So that is why it's so important to own it, to accept it, because when you own it, you can do anything what you want with it. And since it was a gift, the universe won't really care what you do with your situation. So every hardship, which apparently doesn't have any material or, let's just say, human solution to it, well, it always is some kind of hidden potential in it. It always is a blessing in disguise. We just have to brainstorm Or, of course, for other people, it might require an emotional epiphany, or maybe to shift a perception, a worldview of yours, which might be due to a negative experience in the past, a trauma or a big failure which just distorted your life view. So there are so very many ways which we can transform the gift of hardship, the gift of limitations, into something totally different. Now let me give you another example. There are some artists who specialize in very dark, in very macabre, unusual or obscure or highly controversial artistic expression. For example, they depict dead bodies and the process of decomposition. Others depict the cruelty of the world through their photography, etc. Now, all of these people were one way or another in their personal journeys confronted with the cruelty of the world, with death, with what they symbolize through their art. So they had to have moments of depression, moments of sadness, moments when their perceptions tormented them. But what did they do with it? Rather than to allow this to affect their lives, well, they alchemized it, they turned it into art, and their works of art achieved massive success because other people could instantly see within their artistic expression the experience they had, and that experience was the gold, the alchemical value. So of course it advantaged them in the end greatly, but this took a lot of guts and effort and courage for them to process the more negative, the more, so to speak, dark and unpleasant side of life. And of course the courage it took to put it on canvas, photography, music, whatever they did, it took a massive courage for them to do that. So this is one way where we can use this reality check to our own advantage. And of course, both Mercury and Jupiter are squaring Mars in its home sign of Aries. So this is a T-square, a very powerful conversation of tension. And Mars is the inner warrior. It is the planet of action, or from a different perspective, the lower malefic. So it creates temptations, it creates conflict, it creates tension and strife. But ultimately, in the sign of Aries, well, we have the liberty to use this however we want. And if we want to use it for alchemical purposes, to just spiritually maybe achieve what we have to achieve, what we desire, what we want to alchemize, well, that can work perfectly. But chances are another expression of this T-square, as in the more mundane expression, well, this means a lot of battles, this means a lot of conflict, especially, Mercury, especially online, circle of friends, the internet, social media, opinions, truth, perspective, visions, philosophies clashing. This can also represent legal battles. This can also represent where law enforcement intervenes, with protests and people demonstrating on the streets. It can also represent conflict within a family. It can also represent very, very delicate and tough decisions. And of course, it can also represent compromises and the need to compromises. And that is exactly why the other aspect, the harmonious aspect, where the trine between Mercury and Neptune is the energy of faith and inspiration, because even if we accept compromises, well, we can change them over the course of time, or whatever compromises we may have accepted right now, they don't have to be permanent. And this is exactly the essence of the Pluto opposition, because that can reveal to us how we can transform our situations, where transformation, maybe regeneration, resurrection can influence our lives. And through resurrection, I mean maybe a past skill, a past job, a past career, a past talent that you stopped, using or you gave up on in the past, that can instantly return into your life and get things done, even though that chapter of your life when you did that specific thing was closed. But the experience, the know-how, the impulse, the instinctual learning is still there. It is still within you. So there is no reason, if that is the case, why you shouldn't allow to advantage your life and your situations once more. And also there is a very different aspect playing out in the sky right now, where Venus, freshly exited shadow from the sign of Gemini, forms a minor astrological aspect called the quincunx with Jupiter and even Pluto. Now, a quincunx is the energy of surprise. It can be a delightful surprise, it can be a very awkward surprise, it can be a rather shameful or very humorous situation. But either way, the essence is that Venus is the lower benefic and Jupiter is the higher benefic. So both of these planets are lucky, they are bestower of blessings. So whenever they meet in the sky, this manifestation can represent a surprise and delight which can advantage you very much. Just don't look at the way, shape or form it manifests, because its manifestation might not be very clear, you might not know what a lucky potential you just received or the sky just offered to you. Whenever during this time you might receive certain unusual offers, for example job offers, Capricorn, gifts, presents, generosity, maybe gratitude, advice, intervention from a professional, even if apparently you might think it has absolutely nothing to do with you, your personality, your situation, whatever you desire and seek. Still consider it and analyze it, because there can be hidden blessings in it. This can also be a person, this can also be a romantic situation. And Venus quincunx Pluto, this could also be something that you lost or had to give up in the past, which suddenly, unexpectedly, without maybe any reason or that much logic, returns into your life and bears fruits, or it gives you some kind of advantage or power, Pluto. But the problem is that Venus is still holding a square with Neptune, so it's not very clear. Neptune is the planet of illusion, confusion, not knowing what you truly want, not feeling very sure of yourself. The communication might not be very clear. It might leave place for interpretations or misinterpretations. Your intuition might be very, very silent and you might not really know what to do. But of course, during this time, Venus also forms a sextile with Mars. So maybe your gut feeling, your instinct, the sheer force of your will and desires can have all the answers that you seek. Because if you desire something and something enters your life which, even though it wasn't what you asked for, or apparently it's not suitable for who you are, but there is a potential in it, well then you can use that powerful Mars to turn it into your advantage. Well, thank you so much for listening. Wish everyone a blessed and safe day. Until next time, bye for now.